what is long-form thinking, and how is the demise of long-form thinking tied to the speeding up of everything and the lack of leisure? Well, I think that it's very clear that long-form thinking is increasingly a lost art. We are losing that capacity as a society. And one of the ways you can see this is in the decline of books. And let's talk for a moment about what one can do in a book, that one can take 400 pages, 500 pages, in the case of Endgame, 1,000 pages, or 800 pages or something, to develop an argument and to develop the counter arguments, to rebut the counter arguments. One can thoroughly explore an issue. I remember when I was getting my MFA that one of my teachers talked about the difference between novels and short stories. And the way he characterized it was that a novel is the big thing, and a short story is a glancing off of the big thing that reveals the big thing. And it's always stuck with me, and I've always really liked that. And we are seeing long-form thinking increasingly be dismantled through the speeding up of life and through the speeding up of things through the internet and other means. So you have books, and then you have short articles, and then you have, at this point, tweets are allowed 120 characters, 140 characters, something. And what can you convey in that? All you can convey is one unsubstantiated opinion. And it should come as no surprise to us that long-form thinking is increasingly devalued and increasingly absent, in part because we are increasingly fragmented as people. We are increasingly removed from a context of being outside in nature where things can be much more subtle and much more slow, and relationships. We increasingly have surface relationships with everything. I remember what Vine Deloria said to me about being out in nature. He said that being out in nature is not enough. We often hear people say, oh gosh, if you just put a CEO out in the wilderness for 3 days, then that'll change everything and they'll learn to appreciate nature. But that's not how it works. And Vine Deloria was talking about all these kids at college who might go hiking or might go backpacking for a weekend. And he said that's not what it's about, because that's not establishing. All it is what he said, that's an aesthetic experience, which I think is how most of us experience the natural world most of the time. Oh, look at the pretty trees. But you don't actually enter into relationship with the trees such that you know that you start to see their cycles, and you start to see this year there were quite a few banana slugs in this forest. Last year there were quite a few. A couple years ago there weren't so many. What do these cycles mean? What are the relationships between these cycles? When do the first buttercups appear every spring? When do the first trilliums appear every spring? When do the first huckleberries appear? And to have those relationships, to know those things takes a long time, takes sitting in place and being in place and paying attention for many years. And that's not something that can be understood immediately. This is true for so many parts of our lives. And so I want to talk for a moment about the book industry is collapsing, And this has been going on for the past 20 years through various means. And one of the things that this is happening is, with the book industry collapsing, that is collinear with the collapse of our capacity for long-form thinking. And our capacity for long-form thinking is really important for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's really crucial to, so many indigenous people have said to me that the first and most important thing that we have to do is to decolonize our hearts and minds. And one of the things that that means is that we need to relook at everything that we have been taught by this culture. We need to relearn how to think, relearn how to relate. I've said before that Anton Chekhov, a young person, asked him what he should write about, and Anton Chekhov responded, "I want you to write a story about someone who squeezes every drop of slave's blood out of himself." And that takes time. You know, one of the reasons that I am so prolific and have been so prolific as a fully formed adult is that I spent a lot of my 20s doing, quote, nothing, end quote. But what I was really doing was that decolonization. I was trying to squeeze every drop of slave's blood out of myself. I didn't have that language at that time, of course. I was trying to vomit up the effects of a coercive upbringing, vomit up the effects of coercive schooling, vomit up the effects of having been taught to identify with this culture for so long. I was getting grounded, and that takes time. You can't do that overnight. There's a quote by Joseph Campbell that has always spoken to me very powerfully about this. And the quote is, "For those in whom a local mythology still works, there's an experience both of accord with the social order and of harmony with the universe. For those, however, in whom the authorized signs no longer work, or if working produce deviant effects, there follows inevitably a sense both of dissociation from the local social nexus and of quest, within and without, for life, which the brain will take to be for meaning." And another way to put this is, if the signs and symbols of Catholicism work for you, then you have a way of meaning that is set out for you. If the signs and symbols of capitalism work for you, you have a way of life that where a path of meaning is set out for you. But if those don't work for you, you've got to find them on your own. You have to go on what Joseph Campbell called the hero journey. You have got to go out and fight those demons and then come back with boons for your community. And that takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes a lot of trouble. And you can't do that if you are constantly busy. And if you can't do that if you allow yourself to abort any thoughts you have. One of the ways that I write my books is that I spend a lot of time doing nothing. I spend a lot of time ruminating. I love that phrase or that word, because that's what you do. You take an idea up and you think about it, and you think you understand it, and then you swallow it again, and then it stays down in your stomach for a while, and then you bring it back up and you chew the cud some more. And that's what ruminate means. And you know, a joke I've told at many interviews is that and at many Q&As is that one of the reasons I'm not as smart as I seem, because one of the reasons I'm able to answer these questions so often is because I've been asked these questions 100 times before, just generically. Most of the questions I get, I've been asked many times before. And the first 5 or 15 or 30 times I was asked that question, I'd be like, I have no idea. And then it's a good question. And then it takes days and weeks of ruminating on that question before some sort of cogent answer will come to me. And that takes time. I think of writing takes great patience. That I so often think of writing kind of like fishing, that I can't just run out to the water and take a baseball bat and start pounding on the water and hope to catch a fish. What you have to do is you have to put your line in the water, and then you wait, and you wait, and you attend to it. And you can't let your attention wander too much. You can do other things, but you have to just wait for the idea to come, for the for the muse to speak to you. And if you don't have time, it's not going to work. There's a great line that I remember reading. It's always stuck with me. I read this when I was in high school. It's a Mary Stewart book, one of those Merlin, part of the Merlin trilogy. There was this great line that God will not speak to those who have no time to listen. And that is so true for all of us. And, you know, the trees won't speak if you have no time to listen. Nature won't speak in general, or it's speaking, but you won't hear unless you take the time. You take the time to learn the language. And that reminds me of another quote by Joseph Campbell, which is absolutely indispensable for any such development, spiritual development, is a separation from the demands of the day, which all educators until recently understood to be the first requirement for anything approaching a spiritual life. But long-form thinking and long-form being is absolutely crucial to a spiritual life, and it's absolutely crucial to understanding. Look, this culture is killing the planet, and unquestioned assumptions are the real authorities of any culture, and unquestioned assumptions are part of what is killing the planet. The unquestioned assumption that the world was here for us, the unquestioned assumption that this is not the real world, that heaven is somewhere out there, the unquestioned assumption that what we think is more important than what is. And we've had those pounded into us since we were infants, and that takes a long time to break. I've always loved this quote by R.D. Laing. Long before a thermonuclear war can come about, we've had to lay waste our own sanity. We begin with the children. It's imperative to catch them in time. Without the most thorough and rapid brainwashing, their dirty minds would see through our dirty tricks. Children are not yet fools, but we shall turn them into imbeciles like ourselves, with high IQs if possible. And we are turned into imbeciles by this culture. And it's a really hard process and a long process to reverse that. And it takes time again. That's what I keep coming back to. There are two more quotes that I want to talk about in terms of long-form thinking. One is another quote that very much influenced me in my 20s, which is another one by Joseph Campbell. Willed introversion, in fact, is one of the classic implements of creative genius and can be employed as a deliberate device. It drives the psychic energies into depth and activates the lost continent of unconscious, infantile, and archetypal images. The result, of course, may be a disintegration of consciousness more or less complete, neurosis, psychosis, the plight of spellbound Daphne. But on the other hand, if the personality is able to absorb and integrate the new forces, there will be experienced an almost superhuman degree of self-consciousness and masterful, excuse the language, control. This is a basic principle of the Indian disciplines of yogi. It's been the way also of many creative spirits of the West. It cannot be described quite as an answer to any specific call. Rather, it's a deliberate, terrific refusal to respond to anything but the deepest, highest, richest answer to the as yet unknown demand of some wanting void within, a kind of total strike or rejection of the offered terms of life, as a result of which some power of transformation carries the problem to a place of new magnitudes where it's suddenly and finally resolved. And that, for me, really well articulates much of the artistic process and much of the process of decolonization. And that process, you have to break down the personality that you had before and rebuild another one. And it takes time. I keep saying the same thing, that it takes time. And one last thing I want to talk about this that talks about the importance of this is, once again, all these unquestioned assumptions are killing the planet. And we need to, as my doctor friend says, the first step toward cure is proper diagnosis. But in order to diagnose it, we have to look at it, and then look at it through our new eyes that have been transformed. And I keep thinking, as we're discussing this issue, I keep thinking about the line by Milan Kundera that the struggle against oppression is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And everything in this culture keeps telling us to forget. But we must remember. We must bring our members back together. And, you know, I keep thinking also about something my mother said to me when I got very, very sick and almost died when I was 23 from Crohn's disease. And afterwards, the recovery was very slow and I would get impatient. And my mom said, she said over and over, it took you a long time to get sick and it's going to take you a long time to get better. And this culture is very, very sick. And we individually and collectively need to get better. And that takes a long time. And this is really hard when those in power keep pushing slogans. That's what they've got. They've got sound bites, slogans. And we need to be able to cut through those. And to do so takes a lot of time and a lot of discipline. And my prayer for discourse is that we can remember and somehow resurrect long-form thinking, and to think about and to feel about the issues we face with enough patience to be able to find those places where we can have, as Campbell said, that terrific refusal to respond to anything but the deepest, highest, richest answers to the problems facing us in this case, to take on a kind of total strike or rejection of the terms of life as offered by this culture. And if we can sit with that, the result will be that some power of transformation will carry the problems we face to a place of new magnitudes where we will be able to resolve it both individually and then fight like hell to resolve it collectively.